Hey y'all! Today I'd like to show you how to make almond milk and almond meal. The way I do it is kind of a two-in-one process, and it actually saves a lot of money because you use the same almonds for both. Both of these products are things that people don't realize they can just make at home, and honestly they're better quality if you make them at home. If you look at a lot of the almond milk labels especially, there's a lot of additives in there, and Dave Asprey actually said in one of his podcasts that half a gallon of store-bought almond milk usually has only about 6 almonds in it. So here's the right way to do it yourself. It's really easy, doesn't take much time, and it'll last you about a week. So let's head on over to the supplies, huh? Alright, so what you need to make your own almond milk, almonds of course, and actually you can use any kind of nut you want. I've heard cashew and macadamia nut milk are really good. I've never made them. I've made almond milk and hazelnut milk. I prefer almond milk. Hazelnuts are a little bit stronger and they tend to make a more bitter outcome, but if you want that, you can try that. And hazelnuts, on the plus side, do not need to be soaked beforehand, which brings me to my next point. I have this bag of almonds here, but they haven't been soaked. I'm going to be using these almonds today, and they've been soaked. You want to basically measure out however many almonds you need for your recipe and cover them in water and let it sit for at least 8 hours. And try to change out the water at least once in that time. It's easiest to just, cover them in water before you go to bed and wake up the next morning and they're done. There are toxins in almonds, so soaking them in the water actually leaches them out, and it also just softens them up and makes them easier to grind up in your high-powered blender or food processor, as I have. This is a Cuisinart food processor. It works great for a lot of things, including making almond milk. You can also use a high-powered blender like a Vitamix or something high caliber like that if that's what you prefer. So the basic ratio for almond milk or whatever other milk you're making is 1 part nuts to 4 parts water. So in my case, my storage container, which is the next thing on your stuff to get list, is a half-gallon mason jar. So I need 8 cups of water and 2 cups of almonds. I usually just use a liquid measure for both. I've already got half a cup in here ready to go, and I have 2 cups of water in here now, and I'll add that in a minute when I start making the milk. But a couple more things that you need something to put the pulp on after it's done. Basically, you're going to use cheesecloth and you're going to put it on top of your storage container, and when the milk has been pulsed, we're going to pour it through this cheesecloth into your container. Cheesecloth is going to catch all of the almond pulp and leave you just with a nice pulp-free milk in your container ready to serve. And you're going to scoop off the pulp from your cheesecloth, put it onto your storage thing, and either dehydrate it or put it in the oven to dry it out, which will eventually turn into almond meal, but that's for later in the video. I'm using a dehydrator, so that's why I have these little sheets here. They're gonna hold the almond meal as it dehydrates, and it works great. So let's get started. First thing, we're gonna add our almonds to the processor, which I've already done, and go ahead and pour the water through. I try to keep the almonds evenly separated throughout when I first start it. I mean, they're gonna get all mixed up anyway once you turn it on, but may as well have them even to start out. If you're adding any sort of flavoring, I know a lot of people like to put in maybe a little vanilla extract or cinnamon or little things to make it more fun. Now's the time to do it before you start blending. It will get blended in with the almonds once you start pulsing it, and it adds a really nice touch when you have something else in there besides just the almonds, but it's delicious on its own. And I'm just gonna make almonds and water. Make sure your lid is secure when you put it on and before you pulse it. That can be a big issue. You don't want water spraying everywhere, especially since it likes to go through as many little cracks as it can. Make sure, I know this looks like it's clearly not very full, but once you start blending it, the water is going to splash all over through the container. So I would suggest trying with just 2 cups of water and half a cup of almonds. And if you have a bigger processor or a Vitamix, which can handle more volume, you could try adding more of the recipe at once. It takes a few rounds of processing, obviously, with this method, just because I have half a gallon to fill and I can only do 2 cups at a time, but that's okay. I like to pulse it for about 2 minutes every round just to make sure I get the almonds ground up as much as possible, and that keeps the milk as creamy as possible when you have your final product in your storage container. All right, here we go. I didn't sit there doing that the whole time, just so you know. All right, so next step, we're going to go ahead and get the lid off. And since this is weirdly shaped, I like to pour the milk back into the measuring cup so that it doesn't spill anywhere when I try to pour it onto the mesh, because I've had that happen before and more of it gets on the counter than in the actual storage container. So we're gonna do that first. And with things like this too, the blade can come out easily, so make sure you hold the blade in place. As you can see, there's a little bit more than 2 cups in this measuring cup. Well, I hope you can see it. It's a little bit in the shot. See, there we go. There's a little bit more than 2 cups in there. But the volume of the almonds, because they're so pulsed up, it doesn't really add that much once they're broken down. So next, we're going to be straining the almond milk. And as you can tell, I put the cheesecloth on top of my storage container and I kind of pushed it down a little bit. If it makes you more comfortable, you can put a rubber band around the edge to hold it, but I tend to just either hold it with my hands or let it chill there. It doesn't really move that much actually, because you need to pour kind of slow. So you're basically going to just do this. It'll go really quickly at first, but the cheesecloth does its job a little bit too well sometimes and gets clogged up very easily. So that's why I suggest you pour slowly. You can see it coming out at the bottom there. And basically you just do this for the rest of the milk. Rinse and repeat if you need to do it a couple more times because your blender doesn't have very much volume. Once you're done straining it, you're going to take whatever you're putting the almond pulp on, get a little spoon, and go ahead and just scrape it off of your cheesecloth. And I just plop it down there. You can also make sure before you do that you get the last little bit of milk out of the cloth. And then you can just kind of do that. Pop it off the cloth that way. You can see it's kind of in little chunks right now, but you can break it up very easily. And you can already tell that's the start of almond meal. So you're going to want to do this for the rest of your milk until the power of video editing leaves me with a finished product and a huge mess. I would suggest doing this in the sink, which is what I normally do, but you can't really film over there. So let me take care of this really fast. Woo! Video editing to the rescue again. Alright, so here's our final inventory. We've got our strained almond milk, which was what we wanted in the first place. And if you're going to be making almond meal from the pulp left over, which, look, there's a ton of it. I have 2 sheets full. There's no point in not saving the pulp to make almond meal because that's another money saver. Almond meal can be pretty expensive even if you buy it in bulk at the stores. And this is going to yield quite a good amount. So what I'm going to do next with the almond meal is I'm going to put these in my dehydrator. I just put the dehydrator on high and I leave it in there for 5 hours. That'll usually do it as far as using the dehydrator goes, and it's going to turn out looking like this if you go that route. Another route you can do is putting it in your oven and just keeping the oven pretty low temperature, like 200 degrees, and keep the door cracked open. You can close the door for a little bit, but it's going to make the meal a little bit toasted, which it's still usable and it's good, but it'll definitely yield a different flavor when you use it to bake things or make whatever you want to make with it. So keep that in mind. Once the almond pieces are all dried out, you're going to take them and put them into a blender of some sort. I use my NutriBullet. So this little guy right here. You want to make sure you're using a milling blade. Whatever blender you decide to use a milling blade, because that will ensure you get a really fine texture like this rather than blending it up too much and maybe making it into a nut butter or just having it choppy. You can see there's a couple of fairly big pieces still in here, even though I blended the nuts for a really long time to make the milk, but that's just how it goes. And then once you're done milling it into a fine powder like this, you can kind of see it going around in there. Just find a storage container. Again, I've got mason jars. A lot of recipes that call for almond flour, this can be subbed in for. This is technically meal because it's got the skins of the almonds still on it. Almond flour is de-skinned almonds and that are then beat into a pulp. Basically like this, but I've never had a problem with using almond meal in lieu of almond flour. Usually the author of the recipe will tell you if you can't. So there you have it, 2-in-1, almond milk, almond meal from the same batch of almonds. Good money saver, way better for you because you know what you're putting into it, and you get to bake some stuff now. Go make some paleo bread or something.